So tonight I saw Fantastic Beasts: The Secrets of Dumbledore, the third installment in this Harry Potter prequel series. Now, I should probably briefly touch upon the first two if I want to talk about this one. First off, I'm obviously a huge fan of the Harry Potter series. I love the movies, I love the books. I've been watching the movies since I was a little kid, and I got into the books back in 5th or 6th grade, I think. So I'm already a huge fan of this franchise. Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them was pretty fun. I like the movie. I know a lot of hardcore Harry Potter fans don't, but I do. I like that it's not overly connected to the Harry Potter universe. It doesn't need to force a bunch of references down your throat or anything. It just wants to tell this smaller story around these other characters. And I like the movie. I like the script. I like the characters. I thought it was really well done. Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald can kiss my ass. This one was terrible. Nothing worked in it whatsoever. Other than the music, which is a staple, which is good in every Harry Potter film, there was virtually nothing redeeming in the film. The script was one of the most incompetent ever written, at least for a big budget movie as it was. One of the most incompetent big budget movies of all time. The acting was the hit and miss, the special effects weren't that great, and the story was boring as hell. And not to mention, Grindelwald was just not interesting in that movie in the slightest. So now we have this third one, which is promising to focus more on Dumbledore this time around, as opposed to the second one, which was called The Crimes of Grindelwald. It was supposed to be focusing more on Grindelwald, since Dumbledore was in the movie for like 10 minutes. Tops. And he does have a lot more screen time this time, as does his brother Aberforth, who was teased in the trailer. And this one is coming off a second movie that I obviously didn't like, a lot of people didn't like. Like, if you like Harry Potter like I do, it was even more insulting than if you're just a casual viewer that saw the movie. And then, especially when it came to the final twist with the Aurelius Dumbledore nonsense, which every Harry Potter fan was outraged by and clowned on the internet for the past 2.5 years, 3.5 years, I forgot it was 2022. So, now we have this third one that tried to Rise of Skywalker, where it tried to, sometimes it tried to retcon issues, other times it tried to just go with it, which more than I can say for Last Jedi or Rise of Skywalker. So, this is going to be a spoiler review. Obviously, I've never really held back on spoiler, because there's one thing I want to talk about right off the bat, and it's a major spoiler. And it has to do with Aurelius Dumbledore, aka Credence Barebone. Unlike something like The Rise of Skywalker, which tried to retcon the movie yet again by creating its own little thing that kind of was like the other one, but not really. This one tried something similar, but it wasn't as offensive. Instead of making her like they did with Rey, making her the granddaughter of Palpatine, which still makes zero sense. This one, because everybody was thinking that Grindelwald was just lying to Credence to gain his trust by telling him he's the brother of Dumbledore. Turns out that was only half a lie. He is not Dumbledore, Albus, and Aberforth's brother. He is, in fact, Aberforth's son. Now, there's several problems with this. One, in the time we knew him in Deathly Hallows, which, to be fair, wasn't very long, even in the books, it was never once hinted at that he had had a son at some point. It was never even hinted at that he had a wife at any point, or a girlfriend, or anything. And two, this has virtually jack shit to do with the plot. It really does. I could very easily alter the script, very easily, to where he's still the Dumbledore's brother, and it changes nothing. And it would probably take me 3 minutes to rewrite that portion of the screenplay. Because not to mention, Credence has very little screen time in this movie. And for some reason, they made him look like Severus Snape. I don't get why. And something else I have to point out about Credence is that the big fight between him and Dumbledore, it was heavily pushed in the trailers. It was in every trailer, every TV spot, every promotional material we saw for this movie contained at least one shot of the battle between Albus Dumbledore and Credence Barebone. That fight lasted for all of 60 seconds, and was pretty much just Credence getting his ass kicked. I mean, Credence clearly thought he was winning, but he wasn't. He got his ass kicked in that fight, and it lasted about a minute. Weak. Speaking of action, there's virtually none throughout this entire film. You get that one 60-second battle between Albus and Credence. You get a little bit of action before they, while they're trying to do their little heist. It wasn't really a heist. They were trying to sneak into a political election, essentially. And then you had the final confrontation between Albus and Grindelwald, which, again, lasted about 60 seconds. It was a lot better, but it still only lasted about a minute, 90 seconds tops. And it was kind of cool, but it didn't last very long. And speaking of that political election, the climax of this movie was an election. Really? Through all 8 Harry Potter films, we saw it always had a huge climax. Sorcerer's Stone, Chamber of Secrets, all of most of the time it was Harry fighting Voldemort, sure. But then you had other climaxes, such as Dumbledore versus Voldemort, or in Half-Blood Prince, where it was Harry versus the Dementors, or in Half-Blood Prince, where that was a much smaller climax, but it was still intense. You still felt something, and there was always some action to be had. Even in the first two, the first movie's climax was a big fight in the city basically was with Newt and Grindelwald. I can't remember the name of the guy. He was, it was something Graves, I think. And then, so that was the fun fight. And then Crimes of Grindelwald didn't have a great climax, but at least it had one. Like, it was everybody getting killed by the fire with, fighting Grindelwald, and then they had the big, I don't know, elemental dragons, whatever the fuck those were, and had them take it out. So at least there was a climax. In this movie, there really wasn't. It was anticlimactic as all hell. And that's a good person as any to tell you that this movie is boring. It is so effing boring. This movie is 2 hours and 23 minutes. And for comparison, that's about the same length as Maze Runner: The Death Cure, another third movie in young adult franchise. But The Death Cure, not only was that one wrapping up this big story that had a lot of plot threads that needed to be tied together, it had a lot of action to it, it kept the pace high, and it was well written. This movie's not well written, it's not interesting, the plot threads are not tied up because they're planning for 2 more films, and I'll talk about that in a second, and there's virtually no action. I'm not saying you need an action-heavy story, because you can have movies like this, because the first movie wasn't very action-heavy. It was more about these characters, but it was still fun. This movie tries so hard to be super dark in some places, and the tone is constantly at odds with itself. The biggest offender of this is during the scene where Newt is breaking out his brother Theseus. And there's this, like, big scorpion-like creature. You never see the full thing, and there's these, like, little crabs. You see in the trailer where they're, like, doing this little swivel thing. And I'm like, okay, it's a cute scene with the little Fantastic Beast, reminding us that it's called Fantastic Beasts, because there are virtually no Fantastic Beasts in this movie, just like the last one, where him and Theseus are doing this little swivel thing with the crabs, like you see in the trailer, and it's played to be very funny, even with the goofy music in the background that's straight out of Looney Tunes or Tom and Jerry or something. And what's that immediately followed up with? The big scorpion creature grabbing one of the prisoners, pulling him down, you hear a bunch of gross sound effects, and he vomits the guy back up. In pieces. Tonal consistency be damned, I guess. And I guess I might as well get into the characters. Newt's still Newt, still bland, still has no purpose in this story whatsoever. I like Eddie Redmayne, he plays the character just fine. He was very likable in the first one, but these last two, he's just shoehorned in. And honestly, there was a perfectly viable reason for him to be in this movie, because he starts off with these little deer creatures. I can't remember the I don't remember what it's called, but it's a thing that, like, can acknowledge when someone's pure at heart, I guess. It's stupid as hell. And ultimately, that's what ends up deciding the election. And then Yeah, this sounds riveting, doesn't it? But the villains, including Credence, show up, which did kind of surprise me. I wasn't expecting Credence to be there right off the bat. But they kidnap one of them, because they ends up being twins, murder the mother, take another one back, and they slit its throat. Yeah, and there were plenty of kids in my theater that had to watch this, including my brother. And so the thing is basically... And I'll come back to that. But there's another one there that Newt is basically taking care of. Why not have his motivation in this being to obtain the other one? To obtain the other deer. I'm just gonna call it a deer. I don't remember the name for it. It looks exactly like a deer. Like, there's no difference between these things and a deer. I think they had scales or something, like a fish. I don't know, but it doesn't matter. And so back to the other one that had its throat slit by Grindelwald. It apparently can tell the future also. Like, it was able to tell him when his enemies were coming and what they were going to do. And since the heroes had one as well, they were able to predict what Grindelwald was going to do as well, so it's kind of like at odds with each other. That in and of itself isn't a terrible idea, but the power seems way too convenient. That's the word I was looking for. But back to the one that was dead. Grindelwald basically resurrects the thing using basically a Lazarus pit. Like, if you know what the DC Universe's Lazarus pit is, basically the same thing. Grindelwald brings it back to life, but as some kind of like zombified creature. It's like it's bewitched to make sure he wins the election to become basically the ruler of the magic world. Not just the Minister of Magic, but like who all the ministers report to. The American one, the British one, all of them. And so he's basically trying to take over the world. And because he wants to start a war with the Muggles. And he bewitches that one by killing it first and then bringing it back in some kind of zombified state so he can win the election. Yeah, this sounds super riveting, doesn't it? Yeah, this is a very boring, very long movie. And the climax is literally them just bringing the actual live one and then showing that off and giving that one a new, the actual electum, of originally trying to give it to Dumbledore, but he says no, and he gives it to one of the other candidates. Who cares? And then that leads into the fight with Dumbledore and Grindelwald, which, again, lasts about 60 seconds. I'm trying to think if there was a more boring way to do this. Like, I have often said that authors should not be writing movies. And J.K. Rowling wrote the first one just fine. Like, it was a very word-heavy story. It wasn't a very action-oriented story, so it worked just fine. And there were plenty of moments where it let the visuals do the storytelling. The second one is where it really started to dive down the rabbit hole, and this one did it so much deeper. There are a ton of long, boring exposition scenes where characters are just sitting around talking, standing around talking, and getting nothing accomplished. And once again, this is very similar to what I'm saying that the Percy Jackson series is going to end up being. Since Riordan is basically writing the thing himself, the same kind of thing is going to happen. And the same thing happened with the Diary of a Wimpy Kid animated movie that was written by Jeff Kinney himself. It was boring, and it wasn't overly long, it was overly short. But I bitched about that movie enough. But this is another case of these authors should not be writing movies or TV shows or any kind of visual medium, because it's not their forte. It's not what they train themselves to do. It's not what they learned how to do. They learned how to write books, so they shouldn't be writing movies and TV shows. And that is the biggest problem with this movie. The biggest sin, the only sin really in movies, is boredom. There are 7 deadly sins in religious terms, but in the world of cinema, there's one, and it's boredom. And this movie is so going to hell for that. I'm trying to think, is there any... Oh yeah, Tina is in the movie for less than a minute, and has about 3 lines, and all of them are in the very last scene of the movie. Jacob is here doing nothing. Queenie's around, virtually doing nothing. Bunty's in the movie a lot for some reason. don't really care about this character. Kama does fuck all in this movie. The new teacher does the majority. Whoever, I can't remember the fuck she is, but she's around for some reason. Minerva McGonagall is in this movie again, who should not be alive still. She wasn't supposed to be born until 1936, and this movie takes place in about 1928 at the latest. So, yeah, and then there was something else I wanted to talk about, and that's with Ariana Dumbledore. Now, I assumed these movies would start revolving around Dumbledore a bit more and maybe show us the confrontation that led to Ariana'S death, and maybe because it's delving into his fight with Grindelwald. But she's already dead. Hang on a second. This will only take a second. Okay, never mind. I was wondering if she was supposed to be alive in 1928. No, she died in 1900, so never mind. But even still, okay, I was hoping we'd actually get to see that at some point, even in a flashback or something. We don't. It's a boring-ass exposition scene, which, again, that's apparently Rowling's strong suit when it comes to movies. She should have just written the basic story and had somebody else do the screenplay. Like, maybe Steve Kloves, who did the original Harry Potter movies. He's a producer on the movie, so he probably could have written the screenplay just fine. But I digress. So, her painting is, of course, up in the pub. There we go. And it is explained, one, it's established that she was an obscurist. And I know that was a common fan theory, but I still feel like that was just kind of forced in. And two, but that one doesn't bother me too much. Two, it was in the novel, it was implied that it was basically a three-way battle. What led to her death was essentially a three-way battle between Albus, Aberforth, and Grindelwald. In this movie, it is established that it was basically a conflict between the two Dumbledores, and Grindelwald was just standing by watching it happen. So clearly we're not done with shitty retcons in this franchise. Now, does anything in this movie work? The effects look fine, I guess. They don't look great. It's $200 million, so it has no reason to look bad. Most of the acting's okay. Redmayne's still fine. Jude Law's still really good as Dumbledore. He seems to have the perfect combination of the two Dumbledores, and I feel like so I feel like he does a pretty good job with the role. Mads Mikkelsen, I will say, was probably better as Grindelwald, mostly because Johnny Depp looked fucking hilarious in the original in The Crimes of Grindelwald. I know that wasn't his fault, but I feel like Mads Mikkelsen just fit the character a bit more. I feel bad for Johnny Depp. He got fired. Well, I don't know if I actually feel bad. He was on set for one day, but he still had to get paid. Or he filmed one scene and still got paid his $7 million, whatever the fuck it was, for one scene. So, hard to feel too bad for the guy. But, yeah, that was kind of a dick move by Warner Brothers. But I do feel like it was the right move bringing Mads Mikkelsen on board, because I can at least take him more seriously than I could Depp's weird look. But other than that, no, this movie was dumb. It honestly could be even worse than the second movie, because at least the second one was hilariously bad in some places. This one was just boring and tedious to get through, and it was so goddamn long. Why was this movie almost 2.5 hours long? That's all I got. I'm giving Fantastic Beasts: The Secrets of Dumbledore a D. This was bad. Don't bother with this one. If you're a Harry Potter fan or not, if you're a Harry Potter fan, avoid this like the plague. So thank you all so much for watching. What do you think of the Fantastic Beasts movies? Do you like the first one like I do? Do you hate it? Do you like the second one for some reason? Do you like this one for whatever reason? And I don't think 4 and 5 are going to be determined on how good this movie does at the box office. And opening day, it made $20 million. That's pretty bad for this franchise. That's a franchise low. I don't think it's going to make its money back. I think 4 and 5 are going to get canceled. And honestly, if they keep turning up shit like this, that's probably for the best. Because we don't need another shitty movie like this. So that's all I got, and I'll see y'all next time.